or so.
Alright, well, we're just playing something out, and it's got a glitch, so we might change to me ASAP, so I thought I'll turn this on now, and then we'll be ready. If not, let's listen to some Argentine music, and you get to look at my beautiful face, Well, we had some glitches before. I didn't have internet connection. So, this is modern technology, government spending at its finest. The nexus between technology and government spending, or lack of government spending.
"40 seconds.
40 seconds, she says. Today I saw my first bit of flannel. It's 23 degrees out. It's supposed to be 28 later today. And the Chinese are wearing flannel. Welcome to Hong Kong. Okay, we're ready. Almost.
We've been listening to two of Alberto Ginastera's Argentinian dances played by Carmen Piazzini. The time right now is 35 minutes past 8, and joining me live in the studio is film critic Howard Elias. Good morning.
Good morning, with an internet connection. So it wasn't me, it wasn't Facebook Live, it was the radio station's internet. Wasn't working.
Okay, but you got it there.
We got it. And so I'm on Facebook. You're not on Facebook Live. I'm on Facebook Live on my Facebook page, Howard for Film.
Okay, good. And the film this week is Battle of the Sexes.
Battle of the Sexes. And we're not referring to that epic struggle between you and Phil Whelan. But I actually wrote that on my Facebook page. He doesn't know it yet, though.
Okay. Oh, no, Battle of the Sexes, more than just the tennis match of 1973 between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs.
Bobby Riggs, yeah. Mm-hmm. So you asked me if I watched it 44 years ago, and I honestly don't remember. I remember it, but I don't remember that I watched it. But it was watched on TV. Local, domestic audience of 30 to 40 million. Global,
90 million.
90 million.
It was the most televised sports event of all time. At that time.
And also,
still today, do you know?
I don't know, but the other record that still holds up today is it took place in the Houston Astrodome in front of 30,000 fans, and that's still a record for a tennis match. That 30,000 people watching it live is still a record. So okay. That's quite something.
Well, I think I probably did, more than likely did. Of course, I remember it, but I'm sure I must have watched it because I was such a big Billie Jean King fan.
Yeah.
And I love playing tennis, and my first tennis racket was a Billie Jean King
Wilson
wooden racket.
God.
That's how far we're going back.
Yeah, I mean, I had a wooden racket, but I don't remember what brand it was. It was probably generic or something. I don't remember it. But yeah, they were heavy, those things.
They were. That's why I have wrist problems and tennis elbow.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, really.
Right,
well, when we
talk about the movie.
Yeah, when we look back at the first half of 1973, the match, by the way, took place in September of 73. But if we look back at the first half of 1973, it's easy to see how much the world has changed since then. And to punctuate that point, I did some research on what was going on in the world back in 1973. Australia had just legalized equal pay for women. Mm-hmm. Okay, the Philippines President What's that?
Good for them.
Yeah. Philippines President Marcos officially became a dictator. He became president for life. Okay. Mm-hmm. So all these things sort of ring true today, don't they? Right?
And melded with the shoes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned state bans on abortion. Mm-hmm. An unwinnable war, which had divided the U.S. public for years, was finally coming to an end. The White House was mired in scandal with growing calls for the president's impeachment.
Nixon.
And the American Indian movement they were called the American Indian Movement. So the American Indian Movement activists were occupying tribal lands for 71 days, and they surrendered to federal authorities. So it's very interesting. All those things that happened 44 years ago seem to be happening again now.
Some things never change.
Some things never change, exactly. But what has changed...
Or slowly, very
very slowly. Or maybe we're just going backwards in time. Well, what has changed is from then to now is that back then professional women's tennis players were only getting paid 1/8. That's 1/8. 1/8 the amount of money that men were getting, male tennis players were getting. Yeah, that's pretty disgusting.
And of course, this was the big thing with Billie Jean King. I mean, she was fighting for equal pay.
Yeah, she was. Now, I don't know if the wage gap exists today, or I can't imagine.
It still does.
I'm sure it does. I can't imagine that Venus Williams gets paid as much as Rafael Nadal. But at least today, professional women's tennis players can earn substantial income through endorsements,
Yes.
which is something they couldn't, or they didn't, it wasn't even available to them back then. So, and I think it probably began in earnest back then when they got Benson Hedges, or I guess it was Philip Morris was the name of the company, because they had the cigarette Virginia Slims. Remember those small cigarettes that were...
It's very ironic. Virginia Slim sponsoring these
a tennis match. Well, look, back then it was all the cigarette companies were sponsoring sports events. I mean, and beer companies, right? It's been banned since then, but back then that was the norm. So you had a cigarette company sponsoring women's tennis. And that's probably the beginning of. I suppose they had endorsements prior to that time, but that was really the beginning of real endorsements for women sports players. Now, just as all that was taking place, where women's number one tennis player Billie Jean King and her colleagues were taking a stand for pay equity in their sport, along came former men's number one world champion Bobby Riggs. Now, he was. Do you remember anything about Bobby Riggs?
A little bit. I mean, he was kind of like he took a fall from grace. Let's put it that way.
Well, he was an interesting character because. At age 21, he was number one. He was the Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer of his time.
Who was he playing against in those days? Who was
this was before the war, so who knows? I mean, this was a long time ago.
No, I'm trying to think of who because I wasn't a fan of his, but I would have been a fan of other people at the time, and I'm trying to remember male tennis players at the time.
Oh, there was Pancho Gonzalez. Was that his name or something? I can't remember.
Was it Manolo Santana around then?
You're asking me.
Okay, never mind.
I was just a child back then.
Simon would know. Okay.
Yeah, I was 14 years old. I don't know. So,
all right, so tell us about Bobby Riggs.
Yeah, so Bobby Riggs was number one when the number one male player when he was just 21 years old. Now this is before the war, before World War II, and after World War II, he sort of disappeared from view. And in 1973, at age 55, he was earning what he would probably have called chump change. He was just earning, nickels and dimes, basically, to play on the senior circuit. And that's what they called it.
55, you're on the senior circuit.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I get the relevance there. So he was such a character. He had a huge gambling habit. And he would bet on anything and everything. And so what he did to supplement his income is he would challenge retired sports stars, movie stars, singers, anybody who was going through Las Vegas, basically. He would challenge them to a tennis game, a basketball shooting match, golf. He would challenge them to anything that he could possibly make a buck off of. And when he was playing tennis with some of these people, what he would do is he would put a row of chairs on his side of the court that he would have to maneuver around, or he would have a big bag in his hand, like a satchel in his hand, that he'd play one-handed and hold this other thing in his other hand. In the movie, they show him dressed as Little Bo Peep, and there's a flock of sheep. So, I mean, he was doing all these crazy stunts just to make some money to support his gambling habit. And that's how he did it. So when all this was going on with Billie Jean King, he saw a tremendous opportunity for himself to not only get back into the limelight, but also to promote tennis. And he positioned himself as a sexist pig, to put it
I
bluntly.
mean, he wasn't.
Honestly,
I mean, he pretended to be.
yes, I think he pretended. You know, certainly back then, 1973, I thought it was real. And I think a lot of people thought it was real. And as, you know, as a 14-year-old boy back then, I was probably cheering for him, you know.
Yeah, you would.
You know, because he was defending male
and
privilege.
That's why I didn't like him. Okay.
Right, of course,
But
right?
Do you know, in real life, they were friends.
Yes, that's right. They
They were friends.
They were friends right to the end.
Right to the end.
Right to the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's still alive. He's not. So yeah, they were friends right to the end. And
So it probably wasn't that true.
right. So in the movie, you really, my feeling is after seeing the movie, I think he was 90% opportunist, 10% sexist. Whereas the image he portrayed was 100%, 120% sexist. I think he was really an opportunist. He wanted to make some money. And so he positioned himself like that. Now, what happened was he challenged King first. She said no because she thought it was undignified. He then challenged Yvonne, was it Yvonne Goolagong? Or was it was another Australian player? I can't remember. And beat her. And then he went back to Billie Jean King, and finally she said yes, she would challenge him to this exhibition match. Not because she wanted to put his gender in its place, but because she had a mess, you know, she wanted to change women's tennis. You know, that was her mission. So she felt more than that she had to beat him because he's a man, she had to beat him to show the world that women tennis players needed to be recognized, properly recognized. So with that came the Battle of the Sexes, which, as I said, played at the Astrodome for 30,000 in front of 30,000 people and a worldwide audience of 90 million. Now it's very interesting in the movie, and this is real footage because I found the real footage on Facebook. You see clips of that show at that event, which was on ABC Sports at the time, with Howard Cosell. Right?
I remember.
Right, Howard Cosell, and he's dressed in one of these velour tuxes, right, which is what they wore back then. And you're going to love watching this in the movie, watching him and listening to him. He is so sexist, Howard Cosell, and some of the pregame banter that goes on between him, some of the other tennis players. He has Rosie Casals as his color commentator, and he's groping her. I mean, and back then, 1973, it was acceptable, you know, but you know, well, I guess unless you're Harvey Weinstein, it's not acceptable today.
Wasn't acceptable.
Right?
No, it wasn't even acceptable then.
Well, it wasn't acceptable. It was done.
Yeah,
right. It was done. Correct. It was not acceptable. It was done. So those scenes are really quite funny. And so the film really talks about this whole the whole setup, the relationship, talks about her own relationship with her husband Larry King, who
is not the talk show.
Is not the talk show. That's right. It's not the Larry King from the talk show.
King.
It's a different Larry King. Mm-hmm. And actually, I don't know if you know that Billie Jean King is a lesbian. Do you know about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is part of the story is the behind the scenes,
right.
What's going on in their personal lives.
Right.
So we find out about her sexual preference and her
relationship with one of the women. Yeah. So that's part of the movie, and very interesting. She true. She is still friends with her ex-husband Larry King. She's the godfather to his 2 children. He remarried. They stayed married even after it was revealed. She was outed back, I think, in 1981 or something. I think she was outed, and she didn't want to tell. She didn't want to come out because her parents were like these. I think they were Methodists or something, but they were like really strict, and she didn't want to tell them.
But even in those days, yeah, you kept it quiet.
Yeah,
you did. Yeah,
so I think So somebody, I can't remember who it was. Somebody outed her, and so she had to tell people. And
it was somebody that she was having a relationship with, and then because it was so serious that the woman sued her
for palimony.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what, and it was all over the news.
Yeah.
It was just and so no avoiding finding out.
But very interesting. She stayed married to Larry even after that whole business. They stayed married for years afterwards. So they really did love each other. And he, for whatever reason, he said, "Okay, you know, you are what you are, but I still love you." And she said the same thing. So and they are today still good friends apparently. So very interesting. So the film follows this whole story. Now, as far as the film goes, enough of the story. As far as the film goes, this is a very enjoyable film. It's not a great film. I don't think it's going to win any awards in Hollywood, but it certainly is enjoyable to watch. I think Emma Stone, who plays Billie Jean King, and Steve Carell, who plays Bobby Riggs, I think they both do solid work. It's not I guess my criticism with the film, it's not a very challenging screenplay for them. The screenplay was written by Simon Beaufoy, who also wrote Slumdog Millionaire, which is a great movie, and The Full Monty, also a great movie. So I don't know that this is his best screenplay, but certainly it is an enjoyable film, and these two are very, I would hesitate to say, because it's almost an insult, this is it's a competently made film. There's really nothing wrong with it. It's just not a great film. It's a really solid, good film, and it is an enjoyable film. Now, in terms of some of the supporting characters, Sarah Silverman, who's a sort of foul-mouthed stand-up comedian. You know who she is?
No, I don't.
She's I think she used to date Jimmy Kimmel, actually. So she plays the women's tennis promoter Gladys Heldman. Now Gladys Heldman also has an interesting story, but she plays this upper middle class New York Jewish woman. She would be perfectly at home in a Woody Allen movie. The character, not Sarah Silverman. Well, probably Sarah Silverman too. So she was an interesting character. Also, I really appreciated Alan Cumming from TV's The Good Wife. Did you ever watch that show?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so you know who Alan Cumming is. Do you know he's Scottish? He does a really good American accent.
Yeah, all of these Hollywood people, you don't know where they're coming from these days.
Because one time I saw him on TV.
Brits are doing American accents, Americans are doing British accents.
Yeah, for years I thought he was American. And then one time I saw him on a talk show, and he's got the Scottish brogue, and I went, whoa, So in this film, he plays a British guy. So he plays their dress designer, Ted Tinling. Now, Ted Tinling also has an amazing story. Somebody needs to do a movie about Ted Tinling, because he apparently was a British spy during World War II. And
he came to designing women's clothes.
He was a tennis player first. Then he became a clothing designer. In the movie you see that he's sort of half out of the closet, so to speak. Or I guess he's out, but he doesn't flaunt it. But very interesting story. I would like to learn more about him, because I thought he was an interesting character.
And from what I heard, he was designing women's tennis outfits, and they were too revealing.
They were too revealing.
And they were
yeah.
banned at Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, you look at the clothing and apparently the costume that Emma Stone wears in this movie is a replica of the one that Billie Jean King wore at the real one. It's not an adaptation. It really is a replica. And you look at some of these things, and for the time they were very short. And you compare that to what Venus Williams wears today, and today they're wearing practically nothing in comparison. So it's quite interesting how times have changed in that regard. But the clothing is very good.
And no longer tennis whites.
Oh yeah, you have to wear white. Well, look, even at my club here, if you're playing in the center court, you got to wear white.
No, but I'm talking about the change. It's in
so
many places now. It's
you don't have to, except in Hong Kong, where it's like, ooh, we got to conform with convention,
Okay.
And
well, I've got both.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I just choose.
Another thing I loved about this movie is the soundtrack. It's the anthem of our teenage years. It's a lot of great songs from the 60s and the 70s. Oh, you think I would have written these things down? I'd actually, if I could remember.
Look at the closing credits, which you always stay for.
I do stay for. No. Yeah, I know. But, you're going to listen to the music. You're going to go, oh, I love that song. So, good music. So, as I said, good movie. Definitely go see it. Not going to win any awards. I don't think it'll win any awards, but certainly you shouldn't miss it. Now, very interestingly, I always read the goofs section in the Internet Movie Database. Do you ever read that part of? It's people catch errors in films.
Oh, right. Okay.
And, whenever I read these things, I think, how many times do people have to watch a movie to catch some of these things? Because
you could do it immediately. I do it with I could goof because I do it with television all the time.
Do you?
Yeah,
okay.
Within a split second, and when I'm watching things, I go back just to make sure did I see correctly?
Well, that's
because
it.
That's wrong. And I'll rewind and go, sure enough, yeah, I caught it.
Okay, well, see, this is it.
Some people could do that, some people can't.
Well, I think some people are rewinding or watching movies multiple times. Well, I actually saw a goof in this film. And I said to my friend, I said, that's a goof. You know, I saw it immediately. I said, that's a goof. And when I got home, I checked on Internet Movie Database, and somebody had already written it up. So I thought, yay, I found one.
And okay, congratulations.
Yeah,
and,
thank you.
What was it?
I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm not going to tell you. But all I'll say is it's a scene where she's riding in an elevator in Los Angeles. That's all I'm going to say. So when you get to the elevator scene, see if you can find it. And I found it.
Okay.
So the movie starts next week. I'm doing it today because Thor starts today, but I'm only seeing it tonight because Disney doesn't like giving press screenings before film comes out because they're afraid we're going to come in with our video cameras and pirate it, which we're not. You know, they check us. They do back checks.
Really?
Yeah, they do back checks.
Okay.
So, but they're so paranoid that they were not going to let us see the film before it's released. So I'm actually seeing it tonight. So I'm seeing it tonight.
About it next week.
Talk about it next week. So yeah, Battle of the Sexes starts next week. Go see it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Have
so,
an
yeah.
Elias.
Bye.